want to talk about the maturation crisis culturally and fractally in my own life. I am, and I think have mostly been, an inner child and an inner adolescent, or a psychological child and psychological adolescent. And I notice it when I do meditations with my inner child and inner adolescent and can't locate them as clearly or find myself in a relationship with them. And so Lazaris has talked about the fact that regardless of chronological age, that a large percentage of the world is a psychological child or adolescent, or perhaps young adult. And Robert Bly has talked about this as well in The Sibling Society and Iron John. Marion Woodman has touched on this as well, focusing a little bit more on women. I've noticed that it's not clear where to go to find an adult. My father did not become an adult before he died, and I don't think my mother will become an adult before she dies. None of my 4 younger siblings are adults. I would say that the closest thing to an adult that I can think of off the top of my head is probably Robert Kennedy Jr. Or RFK. And it's not entirely clear, you know, in terms of I don't think it's black and white, but you know, certainly one of the things that I look for in someone I think of as an adult is a truth teller and someone who stands with truth telling. And it's a very odd mix to find RFK in Trump's camp. It's an odd coalition. But I certainly understand why RFK was banished from the other camp. And I was thinking tonight about one of my personas, which I would call the shamed truth teller. This is a part of me, maybe mostly 6 years old, that looks around and sees things and asks people around him, why is that happening? What's happening over here? You seem sad. Why? And is met with anxiety and could we quiet this down? Like that's the response. And there's a mix of response from anger to control, to silence, but it's always, let's not talk about that. Let's do everything possible but not talk about that. And it's hard to see that as an adult. But it's also hard as a child to realize that you are frightening everyone that you depend on. Meaning, an infant, a child, does depend on the structure, the system around them to survive and to teach it. It's a tremendously dependent relationship. And so it's very alarming to witness terror come across the face because you noticed something that you're not supposed to see, that no one's supposed to see. And I would say that that's a big, that creates a freeze in me where I don't know what's exactly is frightening these people, but seeing this is terrifying to the people that I depend on. And if I depend on people that are so easily bowled over by a few comments, it must be frightening. So I would say that I felt fear that the people I depended on would collapse. I felt fear because I didn't understand why they were so bothered by a little curiosity. I felt dread because they're reacting as if a nuclear bomb has gone off. But I don't see the threat. And so I'm looking around. What is it? What is it? I still don't see it. What is it? Where is it? So it's hard to calm down because the threat of truth is so pervasive that nobody will explain exactly which truth is threatening and why it's threatening and what to do about it. And then more people get alarmed and more people. And so I just feel like I'm going to terrify the entire world before I even know what's going on. It's too dangerous to move. So I better freeze and be silent and try to figure out how to behave in such a way that does not upset all of these people. And when punishment is involved, it's even more disorienting and painful, like being rushed out of a room. Like, what was just about to happen? Why are you rushing me out of this room? Where am I going? What are the rules here? What do I have to not say to not be rushed out of the room? And why? And then the double layers, the fact you're never supposed to lie. God tells you to tell the truth. And then, the same with Lazaris. What are your principles? Honesty, and this and that. And then just the constant dread of all kinds of things that can never be defined, having all kinds of impacts that are explosive for no clear reason. It's just shocking, destabilizing, freezing. And that has never stopped. Meaning, I don't know. There's probably somebody, but like off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone that I can tell the full truth to without some unforeseen reaction or backlash. And so I'm still dealing with it today. And it's even more disconcerting to see that happening at a national level, where you see YouTube vloggers or WikiLeaks, or being imprisoned and shut up for telling the truth. And so, I was in the Philippines, and almost every government agency I went to wanted a bribe. And so my first thought was, this is outrageous. Let's just make a YouTube video about it. And then someone said, it's not a good idea because they may throw you out, one, and two, bribes are a good business here, and the price of a human life is about $1,000. So 30% of the police force will kill someone for you for around $1,000. And so if you're exposing people's bribes that are worth more than $1,000, they've probably got a sweetheart deal with the police where they'll kill you for $500. So you may not want to tell the truth about all the corruption in the Philippines. And WikiLeaks was universally unpopular with every U.S. sitting president for the past 12 years. And they did the best journalistic job of anyone. And that sounds about right. It sounds about right. And it's why I don't see concept synergy as being uniquely good or uniquely bad. They're right in there with the rest of them in terms of silencing truth-telling. What I think is uniquely bad about concept synergy is that, just as I think it's uniquely bad to sodomize young boys while telling them they'll go to hell for being homosexual. So, hello everyone. Just to let you know, you will go to hell. God hates faggots if you're a homosexual. Everyone got that? No forgiveness, nothing. You're doomed. All right? Come on, little boy, let's come to the back here. You are now a homosexual. I mean, that is uniquely sick, just as it is uniquely sick to then rotate the priests, as was outlined in Mea Culpa Maxima, a documentary that should have gotten a lot more attention and stories that should have been told a lot earlier. But it's the same thing going on with the Epstein files now, where you can see letters of protest 20 to 25 years ago, where young women write in and tell the legal authorities exactly what's going on. and they do absolutely nothing and gather evidence for 25 years. I don't agree with the scapegoating and the witch hunting, but isn't there something in the middle around telling the truth without scapegoating and witch hunting? It's kind of like there's one or the other. Either, you're in a photo with Epstein, so you lose all dignity for all time, or these are all buried for 25 years. And I don't think the culture is being honest, and I don't think the politicians are being honest. So the culture, I don't think anyone is being honest around that, because my guess is that more than 80% of all Americans, if not all people on the planet, would have gone to an Epstein party if invited. And I would guess that at least 30% of the entire planet, and perhaps much more, would not have left the Epstein party because they encountered a room in which various things in there were going on. I would have probably been fascinated, at the very least, and asked a lot of questions. And so I would have, of course, been photographed, looking at things, talking about things, and I would guess I would have gone back. And I would also, in a psychologically illiterate culture, in a shame culture and in an abuse culture, worse things went on in my house, number one. And number two, everyone covered that up and was absolutely outraged if I said anything critical about my parents. In fact, whenever I did say critical things about my parents, I was shamed and told to be more forgiving, more loving, blah, blah, blah. Nobody took the side of the victim or the children. And the advice to the victim was to be more understanding of the abuser. So, I could be wrong, but I haven't come across any Epstein files where people were being whipped, let alone children. My mother would take me out into the forest until I was lost, and then hide until I felt abandoned, and then started calling. And she would continue hiding until I burst into helpless tears. And only then, when she got the rush of transferring utter helplessness to an infant child alone, would she burst out laughing and hug me and continue to make fun of my feelings. The psychologist my parents hired had no interest in any of this. And I haven't heard that much about what happened with Epstein that would produce that level of horror, confusion, and shame. And I may not know the answer. I may not, because I really don't know how to look at all of this stuff in a culture of secrecy and whacking people around and political agendas. I don't really know what has the most impact. I know for me, I've been terrified my entire life. And so that was one of the worst things that could have happened to me. And, I deal with that every single day. Now, is that worse or better than having sex with an older person in my teens? To me, it's way worse, but that's all personal and contextual. An older gay man masturbated me when I was 14 years old in the presence of another straight man. I'm not aware of any residue around that. It just was an interesting phenomena. Would I have rather that delete from my past than being abandoned as an infant by my mother, or her laughing when I was most helpless? Absolutely. So I find it fascinating how even today there is a thick web of minimization, secrecy, denial, and lies around my entire family network of supposedly adult but older people, and that absolutely no one wants to touch that horror. And certainly not my mother. She wants to shame anyone for being so childish to bring up anything like that. And so she does. That's and people will and have defended my mother my entire life. I always found it strange that if I pointed out something substantive and sociopathic about my mother, the response was not to the thing. The response was either how you should treat your parents, but it was often, oh, your mother is so beautiful. And objectively, she was. She could have been a model. But what an interesting defense to psychological torture. Saddam Hussein, did you torture these people? Yes. But he's so handsome. He's so handsome. It's and this is just one of many of the layer upon layer upon layer of defenses. Because in responding like that, it's not just willful ignorance, but you're actually asking everyone in the room to go insane so as to lose the rational thread that's being discussed. And insanity is its own form of abuse. So, the incoherence of all these things, and of course, my mother listened to Lazaris when it suited her. As she read Louise Hay's Self-Forgiveness, when it suited her. As Shirley MacLaine worked with Lazaris, when it suited her, and completely shamed and abandoned her own child when it suited her. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is the maturation process and what I would call the alchemical load in stages of the alchemical and maturation process. And the way I think of it is analogous to the way that I think of nutrients that are bound in the soil when the soil is too acidic. So lime is not a direct nutrient to my knowledge, or however, adding lime to the soil can change the pH. And if the pH of the soil reaches a certain point, then trapped nutrients are available to the plants that grow in the soil. And that's the magic. That's the magic. A way of saying that is that much like a clock hand mechanically moves around a watch or around a clock, there's a mechanism of unfolding, a mechanism of maturing, of growth, of completing a circle, a cycle. A bicycle wheel has its movement. But trauma causes the brakes on the bicycle to be slammed on, shock trauma. The wheel stops. And something has to happen. I would say that there's a load, a psychological load that is put on the body in the organism at that time. Going back to the metaphor of truth-telling, when I'm 6 years old and I start to say something, and every one of the adults' faces turns gray, I realize that I am the producer of a substance that is more powerful than every single person I depend on. It's as if I've given them a lethal dose of poison, and they're immobilized by that dose. And the facial expressions, this is how children think and feel, the facial expressions are relative, meaning if you've watched your parents drive a car into a tree, and you've watched them catch the house on fire, and you've watched them burn some toast, and you've watched them burn the casserole, and you've watched them running to the bank. You've seen all the facial expressions that register the truth of what they care about. Faces don't lie. And you have some sense of how important something is by the relative facial expressions in these patterns. And so you have a sense that burning the casserole is more important than bouncing a check, for example. Oh, bounced a check again. Oh, we burnt the casserole. Now, sometimes burning a casserole is more important than burning the house down. How does that happen? Well, it's not clear exactly how it happens, but perhaps there was so much shame loaded on ruining a dish for a child. Maybe they were 6 years old and they turned on the oven and their mother shouted at them for an hour because a casserole was burned. And so for that 6-year-old, burning a casserole is life and death. But burning a house down, well, that never really bothered. They weren't shamed for that. And so it's just a house. We'll build a new one. And so the faces of the grown-ups of the giants that surround the small one tell the story of cultural hierarchy and of family hierarchy. And if you saying one sentence can terrify 6 giants, and you haven't seen that face before, you don't know why it's terrifying them. You're not trying to terrify them. But the way that I would say it is this. Those 6 faces with that intensity, with their corollary links to survival and security, land in the physiology of the child with the weight of 6 deaths. This person could die. This person could kill you. This person could die. This person could kill you. This person could die. This person could kill you. There are 6 intensity meters on those faces. And it is clear that the lever that sets that in motion is this sentence. It could be generalized when no one will tell you what's going on or talk about it. It could be generalized to say it is speaking innocently. You just saw something and asked what it was. Curiosity is death. Curiosity will destroy your whole family. They will have a fit. So you have to avoid curiosity, or you have to be willing for your entire family and thus your entire life to be destroyed. Now, if you're willing to be the greatest enemy of your family, to destroy your entire family, and you're willing to die, then sure, go ahead and be curious and say whatever's on your mind. But if you're not willing to do all of that just so you can say this one thing that you didn't think was all that important, then don't say it. Don't say it. And that's the way it lands in the body. And if that ripples out to other grown-ups, that nobody can hear that, and you see people throwing up their hands and this, and it's like, what is going on? I mean, how does this little button link to fights and school shouting and this and that, and how? Like, what's the thread? It becomes a life and death biological weight that says, do not go in here. Do not go in here unless you are prepared to die. Okay. Now, the weight of that, I would look at that as kind of lead blocks against that door. How intense that weighting was, that's how many lead blocks are against that door to keep it shut. And the bottom line is, for that door to open, as far as I can tell and experience in my body, I first of all become the 6-year-old again. Second of all, I face death. And thirdly, I am accused of the murder of my family. And fourthly, I am faced with abandonment and banishment for all time as a regressed 6-year-old. If I don't want to feel that way, it's simple. I don't push that door open. If I want to push the door open, it's simple. I become a terrified 6-year-old out of my mind with fear, terror racing through my body, rather jump off a bridge than feel this feeling. And somehow, it's all my fault, and nobody will tell me how, and that's as terrifying as anything else. So that's what I call a psychological load. Now, when too many factual truths get pushed behind those psychological loads, because you can't understand this unless you read this, and you can't read this because it's behind one of those doors, and you can't open those doors because you become a 6-year-old in sheer panic, and you can't become a 6-year-old in sheer panic because everyone attacks you for doing that. Nobody gets it. It's completely crazy making. Heaven help you if you're in therapy and this type of thing comes up. These idiots do not know how to deal with intense emotion, as I learned from watching their faces. I can't tell you how cautious I was with my therapists. And they would say their little crappy training about, we're here for you, blah, blah, blah. Their faces told a completely different story. Don't do here. What if he's not done in an hour? They were falling to pieces. Their eyes were hardening. What are you up to? This. Whatever you have to say, this is a safe place to say it. Complete and utter bullshit. And heaven help you, I tried this with a few therapists, if you actually try to coach the therapist into knowing when they're doing a good and bad job. I remember telling one therapist, I said, when I talk about this, I see these images in my mind, and I see your face go like this, and I imagine that you've dealt with something like this, and it's very uncomfortable for you. This took a heroic act to say, because his face was not happy that I had seen him. And his wife, who was also doing therapy, quickly refused to do any therapy with me. Heaven help a 6-year-old that actually depends on people to, like, what do you do if your mother banishes you and says, no, you can't be my child anymore. This is just too upsetting. Well, my mother didn't banish me. What she did was she hurled me on the floor as an infant in a rage, and I got the message. And I just cautiously inched around after that, and have been a regressed child ever since. Who can you tell the truth to and they're actually interested. They're actually excited. It's such a joy when I run into the very rare person from time to time who is genuinely interested. And it's so disappointing and confusing when the person doesn't live up to their hype, which, to my surprise, because Byron Katie is one of my favorite women for truth-telling and all that, to my surprise, she interrupted, talked over, and argued with me in less than a few minutes of truth-telling. And I thought we were going to have a great conversation where she loves being criticized and argued with, because that's what she says 50 times in just one book. I always love it when my kids criticize because of this and this and this. I thought, this is so great. I'm a regressed child. She loves being criticized. I will criticize her because that's what's on my mind. And it's like, wait a minute, Byron. I know how to interrupt people. I know how to argue with them. I've been doing that my whole life. I wanted the experience of you loving being criticized. Like, that's the experience I've never had before. This is just normal. I mean, I've learned absolutely nothing. You did exactly what I would have done. Interrupted, argued, said I didn't get it right, blah, blah, blah. It's just the exact opposite of what you tell everyone else to do. And not only that, but then she said, come back tomorrow with a worksheet, right? She didn't want to, I said, I'd like to argue with you. She didn't want to argue with me. So she argued with me. Go do it my way, right? Come back with a worksheet. I came with a worksheet the next day. I put that I was available. The whole session went through. And Byron's saying, where's that nice young man, right? Where's that nice young man who was going to come back? Why isn't he here today? I emailed the team. I said, what do you mean I'm not here today? You've seen me here all day. And so then they put me through. And so what they were doing was, because their system leader, their employer, looked bad because of me, they were determined to love what is and accept what is and blah, blah, blah by blocking and controlling me so I couldn't be on the public platform. And so I just gave it up. It's like, this is control, this is fear, that's what I do, that's what everyone else does. That's just not Byron Katie's books. And so I let it go. Fine. But to me, Byron Katie is one of the freest people that I have seen and heard, energetically and otherwise. So I thought I could push the envelope a little bit by telling her the truth. But, I don't have to worry about Byron Katie collapsing. But, most of my therapists had nothing like her self-assurance and security and presence. And so I did have to worry about pointing out their massive amounts of incompetence, because lots of times nothing good happened in the session. And I would say, nothing good happened here. Do you have a plan for next week? No, just come back and pay me. Well, I mean, that gets tiring after $100,000, multiple therapists, and all of that. So my point is simply this. These blocks of truth, this blocks of energy flow, go in as mirrored to the intensity of the way they affect others. And in order to unblock that block, as far as I can tell, the weights, the terror, has to be faced. And those heavy terrors and weights have to be lifted out from behind that door, and then the door can open again. But I always regress to the age at which they were put in there, so it's not really me, an adult me, going back to that moment and opening that door. It's a terrified 6-year-old saying, don't do it, don't do it, they'll kill you, it's the worst thing imaginable, don't do it, don't do it. And I don't have a good guide. As I say, therapists are pretty hopeless in a lot of this territory, at least the ones I've found. And so it is easier to do it alone in some way, because nobody's face is telling me how upset they are at that moment. Just like it's easier to make this recording. Like, this is one of the most truthful recordings that I've made, because it's a recording, meaning nobody's face is telling me they're going to kill me, or they can't stand it, or they absolutely have to interrupt and disagree with me, and and escalating and escalating and escalating and distracting me until it's like, okay, fine, I won't say it. You happy now? We can calm down now? Okay, I will not say that. Okay. It's not worth the sympathetic stress I have to feel, or all the repercussions and all the backlash. It's just not worth it. So I won't say it. I believe that this is what freezes regressions and dissociation in the body. Meaning, if you cannot say certain things, or own certain feelings, or own certain experiences, because you are absolutely convinced you're going to kill someone and that it's all your fault, because that's what the faces say, and because nobody will explain it to you. If you are surrounded by enough of those landmines that get locked in there, and then if in the present reality you get anywhere near many of these topics and you see similar facial expressions, and you're still regressed as a child, because it's like those are the brakes that squeeze the wheel. This has got to be frozen here. It cannot be said. It cannot be felt. It cannot be seen. Okay? But the problem is when you put the brake on at that point in the wheel, the bicycle doesn't go forward. It's stuck there. You have to leave that bike and walk on alone. That bike is there. It can't move. And so that's my experience of arrested development. My mind can move. And my mind can move beyond where my body can go. I can see the pattern. Yep, there's a 6-year-old behind that door terrified. Can I move it? No, because I'm not in my body. Can I get in my body and face that? No, it's too fucking terrifying. Can I get help? No, the therapist is not providing a good container for that. Just fall apart, go into the unknown world, risk death, and be done in 50 minutes? Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. The disrespect for this kind of intensity and terror is enormous. And that disrespect is everywhere. You can't do this in a fucking restaurant. You can't do it in a hotel. You can't do it in a 50-minute hour. You can't do it with your partner while they're texting. You can't do it on the road. Where can you do it? You can't do it at a Lazaris event. Where can you do it? Right? I feel like for the last 10 years, I've known that I want to fall apart. And I can't find one honest, safe, loving person to fall apart into. Partly because I have very low trust in a lot of these flows that I've had to take manual control over many of these instinctual biological processes. And partly because it's very rare. So the combination of distrust and very high standards with the fact that even crude levels of containment are quite rare. I've gone into some of these spaces, and I have usually had to fight for integrity with my pattern. I went to this Mankind Project men's kind of group, and they had, I would say, 50% stuff that I found disorienting and unpleasant, and 50% of stuff that seemed better than nothing. They were facilitating me in one process, and I just had to take over because they were not honoring energies in the space that I could clearly see. So I just said, leave this to me, back off for a minute. I'm in this territory, I can see some things that are not fitting into your process. So I will guide myself through this, and I did. And the facilitator said, I have no idea what I watched. It was profound. I've never seen anything like it in my life, and you did a great job. But I also wasn't in pieces, right? I wasn't falling in pieces, because when you're completely in pieces, you can't self-facilitate, right? And that's the crisis. And so I am a psychological child. I am a psychological adolescent in a 50-year-old body. I do experience life-threatening levels of fear when I move towards certain boundaries that are part of the arresting process in that developmental cycle. Meaning, I start to move something and I realize it's too heavy for the structure that I have to move all of that out of the way. I need help. And as I seek help, I run into impediments. And so I realize it's not helpful. So I'm back where I started. I need help. I run into impediments, seeking help, and so I remain regressed. And the book No Bad Parts work, internal family systems works, family constellation therapy, that was terrible because some of the truths that I was saying seemed to alienate the egos in the family constellation work enough that I ended up taking on more heaviness rather than them lifting anything off me. So I had to recover for 3 days after, quote, receiving family constellation therapy. But internal family system therapy is fantastic, right? Nobody can give you anything. It's all in there anyway. And you can do dialogue around that. So I am lifting stuff off piece by piece. And I am largely stuck in a kind of paralysis where I know where to move, and I feel a dissociative and traumatic level of terror as I move in that direction. So I realize my system, my structure I can't self-guide through that. And then I'm usually in relatively high sociopathic environments. I generally think that the world is about 60% sociopathic, as correlates with 60% or more of all human behavior happening with fear as the deciding vote, as opposed to empathy or joy as the deciding vote. I'd like to do that, but that would mean doing this, and that would mean doing that, and I'm scared of that, so the whole thing is deleted. So fear has the deciding vote at least 60% of the time. And I do not trust this territory with anyone with fear with the deciding vote. And I run into people all the time with fear as their deciding vote when I enter this territory. And so it's like, yeah, fear is my deciding vote, and a lot of the times as well. So I know what you mean, I get it, but that's not the medicine I need.